What's going on, folks? Welcome to Study Hall. If it's your first time here, my name is Philip Godfrey. If you're returning, welcome back, Bible Study fam. And so, Study Hall is a Bible study that's built off of the scripture in Matthew 6:33, where the Messiah tells us to seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So, we gather and study to do just that, to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. Today, we'll be continuing a study series that we began at the top of the year entitled From Creation to Revelation, where we're walking through the entirety of the Bible this year, from Genesis to Revelation, book by book and chapter by chapter. Today, as part of that study, we'll be looking at the entire book of Joel and the entire book of Amos. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the study for today. A little background on the book of Joel. So the book of Joel and the Bible do not give us a ton of insight into the origins of the prophet Joel. All right. It doesn't give us a lot of background. It tells us from the opening verse, it tells us that Joel is the son of Pethuel, but Pethuel is a name that is not found elsewhere in the text as well. So there's a lot of kind of mystery that surrounds Joel as it relates to, at least as it relates to the 66 books that we call the Bible. And so the prevailing theme of the book of Joel is the coming day of the Lord, the coming day of Yahuah. That the people believe that this was a day where there will be judgment that will come and finally be levied on the oppressors of the Father's people. And this same day, there will be blessings that will be released to the faithful of the Father's people as well. What they forgot, though, or they failed to kind of acknowledge in that, is that this is also a day, the day of Yahuwah, is also a day where the judgment will fall on those that may be of the Father's people that are not faithful, that have not remained faithful throughout the period of time. So that's just something to think about as we move into the study. All right, and so as the book of Joel opens, it talks about it begins by telling us about the state of the nation at the time when Joel's prophecy is going forth. All right, and we know well Joel chapter 2 verse 25, right? We know that verse well, but here in the beginning of the book, here is where the need for that verse, the need for the restoration comes from. In chapter 1 verse 4, we see that devastation has taken the land as the palmer worm, the locust, the cankerworm, and the caterpillar have eaten the crops of the land. There has been a pestilence that has gone forth and created a famine essentially. So both these palmer worms, the locusts, the cankerworm, the caterpillars, they have eaten both the wine and the wheat harvest for that period of time. And while this is probably literal, it's also symbolic as it depicts the fact that there's a nation that has come upon the Father's land and his people and laid waste to those things. All right. And all these things have led to a sliding away from his instructions and his expectations. And so we see that in chapter 1, where it talks about the withholding of the drink offerings and the meat offerings from the Father's house during this period of time. So because there was the lack that was created by the removal of the wheat harvest and the wine and all that, that now the people are moving away from, actually, I guess the struggle created I don't want to say the struggle, but this season of challenge created an opportunity for the people to begin moving further and further away from the Father and from his obedience. And it's become common because we still see here an opportunity from Yahuwah for his people to humble themselves and enter back into right standing with him. So we acknowledge that they walked away and all these things. The Father even acknowledges that from what we see here, and he gives them another opportunity to enter back into right standing and come back to being the righteousness of the Father. But here, this humility is pointing to the day of destruction, which is prophesied by Joel. And as this will be the deliverance that the Father has promised for his chosen people, because Joel is prophesying to a specific group of people. And as part of this deliverance, the years that were stolen by the devouring pest, the pestilence that we just saw, those things will be restored. The Father's Spirit will be poured out on all flesh. Prophecies, dreams, visions shall return to the people. And all these things will happen because the Father is pouring those things out on the people that were faithful, on the people that were aligned, and on the people that were operating in right standing with Him. Does that make sense? And come back into right standing with Him. The prophet even goes further to describe the day of the Lord to us, the reader. So it describes what this day will look like, and it tells us that when we near this time, that there will be wonders in the heaven and on earth, that there will be blood, fire, pillars of smoke, that the sun will be dark, the moon will be blood before that day. And so these are the signs of the times. We can look at these things and say, hey, these things are getting closer. The day of the Father is getting closer because I am seeing the signs. We are seeing the signs of these things happening around us and also in the heavenly realms. But what I want to point out in Joel chapter 2, verse 32 is this, and a prophecy of what is going to happen or what is made available by the Father. Okay, let's look at that. Joel 2:32, King James Version. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved, shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, as the Lord has said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call. So we see in all of this that there is still a remnant, which will be a common theme as we continue. It has been a common theme throughout the prophets, but also as we continue moving throughout the rest of the books of the Old Testament, that there will be a common theme that there is a remnant, that the Father has raised up a remnant and keeps a remnant of people unto Himself. But that it shall come to pass, the text tells us that whosoever shall call on the name of the Father shall be delivered. All right. And salvation is included in deliverance. All right. But deliverance is included in salvation. We can talk about all that later. And so the text and as we move back into the chapter here, it tells us that as they are called, Judah and Jerusalem will once again become captive to Yahuah. So as He begins to call this remnant back to Him, they will now become captives, where previously to this, they would have been captives to other nations, as we talked about in our previous previous book studies, that they had been given out into exile because of the decisions that they have made and their disobedience and the judgment that have fallen upon them. Now the Father is calling them back. He's bringing back in this remnant, and now it tells us that they will be captive to Him only, that they will be servants, that they would be yielded, and that they would be following Him and Him only. They would no longer be captives to the nations of the world. And it tells us that in this time, when this happens, all the nations will gather in the valley of Jehoshaphat, where they will be judged for scattering Judah and for parting the Father's land. We often see this. We talked about this in one of the previous studies. It's escaping me right now. But the valley of Jehoshaphat, that He's bringing these people down here in the latter days so that judgment can go forth because of the things that they have done and scattering His people, specifically Judah mentioned here, and then parting the Father's land, which was not to be done. And as the book ends, as Joel ends, we see the prophetic promise that Judah will be blessed and kept forever because Yahuah has done it for them. And you can stand and believe that as well, that because Yahuah has done it for you, you will be blessed and kept throughout the seasons that you are dealing with, throughout the seasons of life that you're walking through. All right. That's the book of Joel. Let's move into the book of Amos. All right. And so the book of Amos, a little background on it is, it's another prophetic book that is named after the writer or the prophet who is being spoken about or being spoken to or speaking throughout the writings. And so Amos it continues the theme of the prophetic books, where he's been used as a mouthpiece by the Father, that judgment was to come upon the children of Israel and the surrounding nations. Amos primarily prophesied, even though he was Judean, he primarily prophesied to Israel, to the northern kingdom. And he did prophesy to the surrounding nations and to many aspects of the world as well. And so the interesting thing about Amos is that Amos did not come up from the way the text reads. The Amos did not come up through the normal prophet camps, I guess. He didn't go to like a school of the prophets or like raised up like we saw over in 2 Kings, where it talks about that Elisha, had the prophet, the widow The widow lady's husband died, and she went to the prophet, and he was one of the sons of the prophet, basically like one of the students of the prophet. He did not come up like that. He was a normal person. He was a herdman, according to the text. He was a herdsman and a gatherer of fruit. But the father called him and gave him the assignment to speak the word of the Lord, to be the mouthpiece of the Father to Israel. And he did just that. All right. And we'll see that as we move throughout the book of Amos. All right. So as the book begins in chapter 1, we first see the background of Amos, and we see the time frame in which he's prophesying. It goes on to tell us that he prophesied during the reign of Uzziah in Judah and Jeroboam the second in Israel. Jeroboam is the same time period that we saw in our previous study when we looked at Hosea, where he was prophesying in Uzziah as well. So they are peers or contemporaries of one another. The text also tells us that this time period that he's prophesying was 2 years before the earthquake. All right, so I don't know this earthquake. Maybe you can tell me about the earthquake down in the comments. But this is another timestamp that the people who knew about the earthquake would know about. So this was happening 2 years before that happened. All right, and so the passage then goes on to discuss the judgment of the Father on the nations that were surrounding his people, for how they have dwelt how they have dealt with the children of Israel. Here we see judgment decreed on Damascus or Syria, Gaza, which is Philistia, Tyrus, which is Phoenicia, Edom, Ammon, and Moab in the beginning of chapter 2. So the Father here is decreeing judgment on all of these nations because of how they have handled his people and how they have dealt with them. It even talks about how Tyrus broke a covenant they entered into with the children of Israel by selling them, as slaves to Edom and all these different types of things. So, there are lots of things going on there that you can read about and study, but the Father here is decreeing judgment on them for those things that they have done. Well, next the book then pivots, and from about verse 4 or so of chapter 2 on to chapter 6, the Father now begins to deal directly with his people, with the people of Israel through the prophet. And so the Father here is speaking, very similarly to Judah and Israel as he did to the foreign nations in chapter 1. And he's telling them that their sins and transgressions have become so great that they are unable to be pardoned. And the text goes on to tell us that, among other things, the people, they despised the law of the Father, that they didn't keep his commandments, that they lied profusely, they profaned the Father's name with their actions, that they even made pledges to idols with the things that he gave them. And this is a recurring theme that we have talked about previously in the previous books of the prophets. But the Father is speaking about how he tried to help them. How when he brought them out of Egypt, he walked them through the wilderness. He set them in the promised land. He even sent them prophets, but they didn't receive the assistance that he tried to give them. That he sent them prophets, but it said, the text goes on to tell us that they not only did they not listen to the prophets, they not receive the prophets, but they even told them to stop prophesying. So the very thing that the Father sent to deliver them, to save them, to prepare them, they rejected. And this is something we need to be mindful of, that we are not rejecting the very thing that the Father desires to use to advance us, to preserve us, to elevate us, to cover us, to keep us, to prepare us, that we not reject these things. And that is what his people did. That is what the people of Israel did. He sent them prophets, but they did not listen, and they even told them to stop speaking the word of the Father. And so even though he had chosen them, as we look at chapter 2, it tells us that they were the only nation that he had known in all the earth, like in that way intimately. So he had chosen them, he had set them apart, and all these things. It says that they will still be punished for their iniquities, both Judah and Israel. And the funny thing here to me, and maybe it's not, it's funny to me at least. The funny thing here to me is that if they had listened to the prophets, that they would have known all these things, that they would have known that the Father was trying to help them this entire time. They would have known that the Father was trying to prepare them this entire time. They would have known that the Father was on their side. They would have known all these things if they had actually listened to the prophets. because the text tells us that he will do nothing without revealing it to the prophets. And the same is true for us, that we might know about these things if we listen to the prophets, if we listen to the prophetic word of the Father by reading your Bible. It's not always a prophet, it's not always a word of person speaking directly to you, but let's not get into prophets. But here, the text tells us that he does nothing without revealing to the prophets. And so when this judgment comes, it goes on to tell us that the things that once separated people, where people were separated by class or by status or by tribe or by money or by sex or gender and all these things, that those things aren't going to matter when judgment comes, that everyone who is not the remnant will be judged. Whether it talks about like summer houses and winter houses, where you got a big house or a little house, he's going to judge both the houses. You got multiple houses, he's judging all the houses because of the decisions that they made and how they have walked away from him. Chapter 4 shows us that that he even went through a lengthy and intentional process, the Father did, to try and get them to return unto him. But they did not. It tells us that the Father sent rain. No, he withheld rain. Sorry. He withheld rain from them. It talks about how famine, he sent famine against the crops, how he sent pestilence against them, hoping that these things would turn them to him. But they still did not turn to him. These things did not move them back towards him in any way. And even as he took away everything that they found hope and comfort in, it tells us that they still would not seek him. That is how proud they had become. That is how self-sufficient they had become. That is how much they had put hope in those that were around them, that they still would not seek him even when all these things had occurred. And because of this, the Father tells them that there will be great destruction and turmoil that will come upon them and upon their land. But even with all of this that they've done, there was still a belief within the nation, like we just talked about in Joel, about the day of the Lord. That the people were still waiting, even with all this foolishness that they're doing. They are waiting for the Father to come and levy judgment on their enemies, to come and oppress their oppressors, not realizing that the day of the Lord would also bring judgment upon them, as they are those that are not aligned with the Father and his ways, as they are those that have told his prophets to stop prophesying, as they are those that have walked away from his ways, that have not sought him even with the opportunities that he's given them. That judgment is going to come upon them as well. So we need to be preparing ourselves more intentionally instead of looking for the Father to do things against other people. We need to be asking the Father to work on us so that we can be found as those who are in right standing when that time comes. Let me get off of that subject. And so after this, the Father decrees, after the decrees of judgment in these chapters that we saw, like 2 roughly through 6, we then see Amos, the text pivots again, and Amos begins having visions and receiving warnings through some interactions with the Father. So we see in chapter 7, where first Amos, he's having a vision of grasshoppers as judgment. And the grasshoppers as judgment, they come and they eat the grass of the land. So this is a picture of judgment on the people. But the text tells us that the Father withdraws that judgment. Amos asked him a question, and he withdraws that judgment. We then see a vision of fire, and it's being presented as judgment as well, but the Father withdraws that judgment too. And finally, in that part of the chapter 7, there is a vision of a plumb line, which evidences that the judgment of the Father is imminent on both the people, the land, and specifically Jeroboam, who was the king at the time as well. And so this judgment is not withdrawn. This is a depiction that a sign that judgment is imminent and must take place. Chapter 7 then has like a little break in it where there is like an historical kind of inclusion where Amos is recapping an interaction he had with Amaziah, who was one of the leaders of a particular region in Judah, right? And so, or Israel. And so Amaziah tells him, I might not be saying that right, but hopefully I am, tells Amos to get out of town because he was prophesying, because he didn't like the things that he was prophesying. So he's prophesying about Jeroboam's death. He's prophesying about the fall of the nation. These are things that we see the Father has said. But Amaziah doesn't like those things. He tells Amos to go down into Judah and prophesy to them. But Amos then pushes back and tells him that he Like he don't know who he talking to, basically. But nah, he didn't come up through the normal ranks. He didn't come up in the normal prophet kind of way. And he is only doing this because the Father has given him the assignment to, and that he tells Amaziah that he is not going to prophesy against anyone except Israel, just like the Father told him to. And then he prophesies judgment on Amaziah and his family line, which it was in one of the books of Kings or Chronicles. Well, we see that Amaziah and his family line were wiped out, and we see this prophecy going forward here, and we saw it fulfilled in one of the previous studies. I have to go back and look that up for myself. But as the book ends here, so we saw that, and that's how that ends. Amos standing his ground and decreeing that no, he's only going to do what the Father tells him to do. And this is something that we should really, in my mind, we should really hold on to, because Amos stood there and he said, no, I'm only going to do what the Father tells me to do. And sometimes we have to be more sure-footed and firm, rooted, that like, no, this is what the Father has said, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm doing that until he tells me something different. Not because someone else told you something different. Not because someone else said, hey, why don't you go down and do that over there? Hey, why don't you ever thought about this? Like, no. I'm doing what he told me to do. I'm being obedient. And if he says only prophesy to Israel, I'm not going to Judah to prophesy to Judah. Okay? Let's keep going. Back to Amos. So as the book of Amos ends, we see more visions indicating that the time of the Father's grace has run out. There's a vision in chapter 8 where Amos is seeing like summer fruit. And this summer fruit signifies what? It signifies, fruit rots. Summer fruit rots. And so there's a time period, there's a time limit, there's a timeline on the freshness of that fruit. And so this vision signifies that the time has arrived and that the Father will no longer pass over them, his people, anymore. And the scariest thing to me personally in chapter 8 is verses 11 to 12, where the Father says that there will be a period of time in the nation where there will be a famine. It talks about it's not going to be a famine of food or water or any of those things. It's going to be a famine of hearing the words of the Father. Isn't that scary? And during that season that the people will seek all over for the word of the Father, but they will not find it. And so I don't know, it's something to think about. Like I often read these things and think about, like, are we in a season, Father, like that? Like, are people seeking words from all these different types of things and not able to find it? Are we in a season like Amos chapter 8? Anyway, so I think about that. But that is scary to me, that there is a period of time where the Father's decreeing that there will be an absence of being able to hear his voice and hear his words for his people, and that people, they resort to looking for those things, and maybe some even thinking they found them, but the text tells us that they didn't find it. It's just so interesting. We also see Amos here having a vision of the Father on the altar and judgment coming to the house, that none should escape. The Father even goes further here to say that all the sinners of his people, so these are not just sinners. A lot of people can get that mixed up. These are not just sinners. He's saying that the sinners of his people will die by the sword. All those who said that the evil would not come. So there's a group of his people who said that these things would not happen to them. And those people are sinners of his people. And those people, they perish by the sword, according to the text. But as the book of Amos ends, true to his nature and true to what we've seen thus far through the prophets, the Father promises that he will raise up a remnant, that he will bring this remnant back into the land, and that they will build again and will be planted in that land again and will no more be pulled up out of their land any longer. All right. So that's what I got for you guys today. That's the study for Joel and Amos, the entirety of those books. You can, on Sunday, we'll be looking at Obadiah, Jonah, and Micah. Okay, so we're moving quickly through some of these smaller chapters we're putting together, but I hope that you are enjoying the studies as much as I am. And if not, I'm enjoying them and I'm doing my best, and we're going to keep going. All right. So listen, I love you, but more important than that, the Father loves you. Let him love you. Start before you're ready and don't stop. I'll see you guys next time.